Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Amir Hashem Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn halachos sukkah. We're in the midst of a very fascinating Siman. Every Siman seems to be a fascinating Siman. We are in Siman Tuf Reish Lametes in the midst of Sif Beis. We pick up today on the very top line of Kuf Daled Amud Aleph. But before we go weiter in the Mechaber, we need to recap very quickly what the Mechaber has told us so far about the chiyuv to eat in the sukkah. So let's go back to Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, and I'm going to read from the second line up on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, where the Mechaber told us, Aval muter lecha lachilas harai chutz l'sukkah. The Mechaber was differentiating over here between sleeping in the sukkah and eating in the sukkah. And by the way, we're going to discuss sleeping in the sukkah in greater detail a little bit later, I think later in today's share. But at the outset of Sif Beis, the Mechaber told us that you're not allowed to sleep outside of the sukkah, and you're not even allowed to sleep a shinas arai outside of the sukkah. And we said that a shinas arai is even a little bit more than 54 seconds. So a 1 minute long sleep constitutes a shinas arai, and you're not allowed to sleep a shinas arai outside of the sukkah. Then the Mechaber went on to discuss eating, and the Mechaber said, Aval, however, in contrast to sleeping, muter lecha lachilas arai chutz l'sukkah, you are allowed to eat an achilas arai. What's an achilas arai? An achilas arai is an eating outside of an established meal. We would call it a snack. You're allowed to have a snack outside of the sukkah. Well, now the question comes up, what constitutes a snack? So the Mechaber told us, V'kama achilas arai, what constitutes a snack? Kebetza mipas, up to the volume of an egg, of bread. Now let's remember, so far the Mechaber is talking to us strictly in the context of pas, which is very choshuv. Pas, bread, the staff of life. So the Mechaber tells us what constitutes a snack: less than the volume of an egg of bread. More than the volume of an egg of bread automatically is a sudas kva. That's automatically an established meal. And it doesn't matter how you eat it, what kind of setting you eat it in, how fast you eat it, if you eat it on the go, if you eat it while you're walking around, it doesn't matter. When you eat more than the volume of an egg of bread, that constitutes an achilas kva, and you're chayiv in sukkah, and you're going to have to make a bracha of leishev basukah. Then the Mechaber said, Umutu lishtois mayim v'lechel peiros fa'afilu kava alayu chutz l'sukkah. The Mechaber said you could drink water, you could drink wine, you could eat fruit. The Ramah told us you could even be kaveya suda on fruit. How would you be kaveya suda on fruit? So we're going to see later in today's shir that eating b'chabura, eating in a social setting, can create a kvius. So if you invite guests over and you have a beautiful fruit platter and some beautiful china dessert plates and silver fruit knives and beautiful napkins, and everybody sits down and eats together, that would have a certain level of kvius to it. The Ramah is telling me that a kvius over peiros is not mechayev you in sukkah, and we saw the Mishnah Berurah already, and the Mishnah Berurah said the reason for that is a sudas kva of peiros only rises to the level of a sudas arai of pas. And a sudas arai of pas, you're allowed to eat outside of the sukkah. So even a sudas kva on peiros, you're allowed to eat outside of the sukkah. And now we get up to where we're really up to for today's shir, top line of Kuf Dalet Amud Aleph, where the Mechaber says, Umi sheyachmir al atzmai, somebody who wishes to be stringent upon himself. He wants to undertake a chumrah, a stringency. And he doesn't want to even drink water outside of the sukkah. And lest you think that for any reason the Mechaber is only discussing drinking, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah cut in Yodalit, where the Chavetz Chaim says, when the Mechaber discusses a chumrah not to drink water outside of the sukkah, the chol shekain pas derech harai, certainly he's going to undertake a stringency not to eat a snack of bread. He's not going to have less than the volume of an egg of bread. He's not going to do an achila, even though it's a type of achila that's potter in sukkah. It's a snack, it's an achila sarai, but that's the chumrah this person wants to undertake. He wants to undertake Not only is he not going to eat an achilas arai outside of the sukkah, he's not even going to have a drink of water outside of the sukkah. On that, the Mechaber says, Harei zeh meshubach. This person is certainly praiseworthy. There is room for such a chumrah. It's a praiseworthy thing. Now, I want to direct you to a very interesting Biur Halacha. Biur Halacha on Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, Dibra Maschil, Afilu, no, Aval Mutter Lecha Lachilas Arai. It's the third Biur Halacha on Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, where the Chavetz Chaim addresses this chumrah that the Mechaber just told us about. And the Biur Halacha says, Va'afilu Talmud Chacham, even a person who's a real Talmud Chacham, Im roitze shaloi lahachmer al atzmei bekach, if he does not desire to undertake this chumrah, he doesn't want to be noyeg this chumrah, rashoi, he's within his rights. If somebody doesn't want to undertake the chumrah, that he's not even going to drink water outside of the sukkah, that he's not going to eat an achilas arai outside of the sukkah, the Chavetz Chaim says, rashoi, he's within his rights not to undertake such a chumrah. V'loi hevi kemi she'eino medaktik b'mitzvahs. It doesn't mean that this Talmud Chacham, somehow you look at him and you say, wow, I thought he was a Talmud Chacham. I see he's drinking a coffee outside of the sukkah. What kind of Talmud Chacham is that? Says the Biur Halacha, no. Don't think that this person is not a medaktik b'mitzvahs. You're not chayiv in sukkah. An achilas arai is not chayiv in sukkah. A drink of water is not chayiv in sukkah. If he wants to eat and drink that kind of eat and drink outside of the sukkah, rashai, he's allowed to. Yet the Mechaber is telling us there is room for a chumrah. There's room for a chumrah. It's during sukkahs. You live inside the sukkah. Your life is supposed to be inside the sukkah during sukkahs. So okay, so you even a drink of water you're going to have it in the sukkah. Harei zeh meshubach. Okay, so before we go weiter in the Mechaber and things start to get complicated, I just want to emphasize and stress what we've seen so far when it comes to eating in the sukkah. The Mechaber told us an achilas arai, a snack you're allowed to eat outside of the sukkah. An achilas kva, you have to eat inside the sukkah. What do we know so far about what constitutes an achilas kva that's chayiv in sukkah, and what constitutes an achilas arai that's potter in sukkah? What we know so far is primarily in the context of pas. When it comes to bread, if you eat less than the volume of an egg of pas, that's an achilas arai. You could eat it at your dining room table in your house. You're not chayiv in sukkah. If you eat more than the volume of an egg of pas, ma'at yoiser mikabetza mi pas, if you eat the most minute amount over the volume of an egg of bread, that's an achilas kva. And it doesn't matter how you eat it. It's an automatic achilas kva. It's chayiv in sukkah, and you're going to have to make a bracha of leishev basukah. When it comes to other foods, when it comes to fruit, even an achilas kva, eat it outside the sukkah. The Mishnah Berurah told us about meat. Where's that Mishnah Berurah? The Mishnah Berurah said, no. Ice cotton yud gimel on kuf gimel amid braise. The Mishnah Berurah said, "V'hu adin achilas basar, meat, v'dagim, fish, gvina, cheese, ushar mine Michael, chashuvim kipera l'das al shulchan aruch." According to the Mechaber, these types of foods, they all have the same din of Paris. They're all considered an achilas arai. It doesn't matter how you eat them. You can eat them outside of the sukkah. So the truth is, according to this, if you're going to have a steak and fries, you want to have for supper a steak and fries, you go to the right restaurant, a steak and fries costs you almost $100 for a good steak and fries. It's a delicious supper. You could sit down and you could have a steak and fries outside of the sukkah, and like the Mishnah Berurah said, chashuvim kipera, it has the same din like Paris, which is that even if you're kaveya on it, even if you sit down and you make a real meal out of it, you're not chayiv in sukkah. That's what we know so far. Now we come, end of the top line of Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, v'tavshil ha'osui mechameshes minim. Now the Mechaber is going to discuss a cooked dish that's made with one of the 5 species of grain. For instance, a bowl of oatmeal. Oats are one of the chameshes minei dagan. It's a cooked dish of chameshes minei dagan. Farina is a cooked dish chameshes minei dagan. Wheatina, cooked dish chameshes minei dagan. What's the halacha? Says the Mechaber, v'tavshila osei mechameshes minim, a cooked dish made out of one of the 5 species of grain. Says the Mechaber, it depends. Im kaiveya olav, if you make a kviyus suda out of this cooked dish, choshev kva, that constitutes a kviyus. Now this is an achilas kva, v'tzarech sukkah, and it needs a sukkah. Very good. What is the statement of the Mechaber? You have a cooked dish of chameshes mine dagon. It depends. If you make a kviyus, then that's a sudas kva, and a sudas kva is chayv and sukkah. If you don't make a kviyus, then it's an achilas arai, and you could eat it outside of the sukkah. But the Mechaber does not tell me what constitutes a sudas kva and what does not. All we know so far from the Mechaber, more than the volume of an egg of pas, that constitutes a sudas kva. But what constitutes a kviyus by a tafshil of chameshes mine dagon, the Mechaber did not tell me. So this line of the Mechaber is the subject of most of the Mishnah Berurah on this page, and most of the Mishnah Berurah that we're going to learn today. So let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tezvav. Im kaiveya olav. The Mechaber tells me, by a tavshil of chameshes mine dagon, you need to be kaiveya. So what the Mechaber is saying is, there's a distinct difference between pas and between a tavshil of chameshes mine dagon. By pas, in order to have a kviyus, you don't actually have to make a kviyus. You don't have to eat a large amount that constitutes a meal. You don't have to sit down and eat it in the setting of a meal. All you have to do is eat that volume. You eat the volume of an egg, that's an automatic kviyus. But that's not the case by a tafshil of chameshes mine dagon. By a tafshil of chameshes mine dagon, in order to have a kviyus, you have to be kaiveya olav. You have to make a kviyus. You see those words in the Mechaber? Im kaiveya olav. If you make a kviyus, chashev kva. That's a kva. That makes it a sudas kva. Yechayv and sukkah. By pas on kuv gimel amud beis, the Mechaber didn't say that. By pas on kuv gimel amud beis, all the Mechaber said was, if you eat less than a kabeya, less than the volume of an egg, it's achilas arai. If you eat more than a kabeya, it's an achilas kva. But he didn't say anything about you being kaiveya. By tavshil of chameshes mine dagon, you have to be kaiveya. You need an actual kviyus in order to generate a chiyuv of sukkah. And that's, now the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain to me, what does that mean, im kaiveya olav? What does it mean if you make a kviyus? And the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell me 2 different ways that you could make a kviyus. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ois Katan Tesvav, im kaiveya olav. Ritzayna loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say over here, when he says im kaiveya olav, if you make a kviyus, what he wants to say is, 1, she'oichlam b'chabura. If you eat it in a setting of kviyus, if you make a social event out of it, if you're eating it in a social setting, people get together, they sit around the table, and they're eating together, that makes a meal. That setting has now established this eating as the eating of a meal. Now it's a sudas kva. If you don't have anybody else around, and you're just standing there, eating out of a bowl, that's not a sudas kva. So that would not meet the level of kaiveya olav. So that's one way that you could establish a kviyus. One way to establish a kviyus is you sit down, you eat it together b'chabura, that makes it a sudas kva, it generates a chiyuv sukkah. Or alternatively, says the Chavetz Chaim, she'oichel shir chashuv she'kaiveya seudasai bazeh. Or you eat an amount that is a kviyus. You eat an amount that this is called breakfast. What is that amount? So the Chavetz Chaim over here doesn't tell me what that amount is. He says it's an amount shekaiveya suudasai bazeh, that you are kaiveya your suda on that amount. So if you take a look at the Biur Halacha over here on Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, Dibra Maschel im kaiveya alav chashiv kva. He says, Ayin b'Maimer Mordechai, take a look at the Maimer Mordechai, Shamaseku concludes, Dibididei Talya Milsa, that this is up to each individual. The Kol Shehu Kava Alav, an amount that is a meal for you. an amount that you are kavea your suda on, even if that's not the amount that the vast majority of people eat for a suda, chashav kva, that's considered a kvius. Okay, so now let's just put this in broader terms, in like practical terms. Let's say a bowl of oatmeal. So a bowl of oatmeal, if you take a look at the side of the box of the Quaker Oats, it will tell you that a serving is a half a cup of oats cooked together with 1 cup of liquid. So you want to make a serving according to Quaker Oats. That means that's a breakfast. That's a kviyas suda. What's the shir shederech b'nei adam likbaya olav? It's when you cook a half a cup of oats in a cup of beverage and water or milk, and that makes you a bowl of oatmeal. That's a bowl of oatmeal, and that's an amount shederech b'nei adam likbaya olav. Let's say you are a very small, petite person, and you can't finish a whole serving of Quaker Oats. So when you sit down to make oatmeal for breakfast, you don't eat a full bowl. You eat a half a bowl for breakfast. So it's 365 days a year, 52 weeks a year. Twice a week you eat oatmeal for breakfast. So about 100 days of the year you eat oatmeal for breakfast. And every one of those 100 weeks of the year you eat a half a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast. So then your kviyas suda is a half a bowl of oatmeal. So on Sukkot, if you eat a half a bowl of oatmeal, right, it's a tavshel of chameshes minei dagan, you ate what the Mishnah Berurah just called an amount shir chashuv shekavea sudasai bazeh. You ate a shir chashuv, a significant amount that you are kavea suda on. That's your breakfast. So that would be a kviyus according to the mechaber, and now it generates a chiyuv of sukkah. Okay, so here we have, strictly speaking, what the Chavetz Chaim is going to identify as the shita of the mechaber. The shita of the mechaber is, when it comes to a tavshil of chameshes minei dagan, whether or not it generates a chiyuv of sukkah is going to depend on whether or not you were kaveya on that meal. If you ate it b'chabura, you made a kviyas, generates a chiyuv of sukkah. If you ate a shir chashuv that you are kaveya su'udasai bazeh, you ate what constitutes a meal for you, then you were kaveya suda, boom, you've generated a chiyuv of sukkah. Now the Chavetz Chaim brings down a Magen Avraham. V'ayin b'Magen Avraham, take a look at the Magen Avraham, shehik shalzeh. He asks kashas on this shita of the mechaber. V'daitoi, and it's the opinion of the Magen Avraham, dedinoi mamish k'moi b'pas. The Chavetz Chaim, the mechaber has drawn a very clear distinction between pas and between tavshel of chameshes minei dagan. By pas, if you eat more than the volume of an egg, instant kviyus, instant chiyuv of sukkah. By tavshel chameshes minei dagan, it's up to you whether or not you will kaveya suda. Kaveya suda, chiyuv sukkah. Not kaveya suda, no chiyuv sukkah. Magen Avraham says no. According to him, daitoi dedinoi mamish k'moi pas. He treats tavshel of chameshes minei dagan exactly the same as pas, which means the yoiser mikabetza ma'at. If you eat an amount, a minute amount over the volume of an egg of chameshes minei dagan, chayiv b'sukkah, you have a chayiv of sukkah. That's the shita of the Magen Avraham. Achein, however, le'inyan levarech leishev b'sukkah. When it comes to the question of whether or not you're going to have a chiyuv to make a leishev, then das ha'achrayim, it's the opinion of the achrayim, de'ein levarech, that you do not make a leishev b'sukkah, rak kishayikba alav suda, unless you taka make a kviyus k'may shekasav b'shulchan aruch, in the way that the Shulchan Aruch writes. So again, we have the shita of the mechaber, who draws a great distinction between pas and tavshel chameshes minei dagan. He says by chameshes minei dagan there is no automatic kviyus. You have to be kaveya suda. You only have a chiyuv sukkah if you're kaveya suda. We have the Magen Avraham who says no, chameshes minei dagan is the same as pas. If you eat more than the volume of an egg, that's an instant kviyas suda. You have a chiyuv sukkah. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, that chiyuv of sukkah, according to the Magen Avraham, that came with eating more than the volume of an egg, that doesn't necessarily bring a chiyuv to make a leishev basukah. The Achrayim agree you don't make a leishev unless you're kaveh suda in the manner described over here by the Chavetz Chaim in the shita of the Mechaber. Okay. Continues the Chavetz Chaim and he says, "V'da'oid," and you should know furthermore, "Tehiskimu kama Achrayim," that many Achrayim agree. The nachayin lahachmir, it would be proper to rule stringently. Milechal basar v'dagim ugvina chutz lasukah. That it's proper to be machmir, not to eat meat, fish, cheese outside of the sukkah. V'dafka b'kvius, if you're going to be kaveh suda. So what this Chavetz Chaim is saying is, like I told you at the outset of the shir, the Chavetz Chaim told me on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis that in reality you could have a steak and fries outside of the sukkah, even though your mamish going to eat it b'kvius. You might even eat it b'chabura. You might invite guests over and break out the grill, and you're going to have a beautiful steak dinner. You're going to have steak and fries and all grilled vegetables. The Chavetz Chaim told me on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis that the halacha of basar is just like the halacha of peiros. Even if you eat it b'kvius, there's no chiyuv of sukkah. So this is all considered an achilas arai when it comes to the chiyuv of sukkah. But over here, the Mishnah Berurah tells me that hiskimu kama achrayim. Many achrayim agree the nachayin lahachmir, that there's room to be machmir. It's proper to be machmir. Milechel, and to refrain from eating basar v'dagim ugvina chutz lasukah, these kinds of foods, meat, fish, cheese, outside of the sukkah, v'dafka b'kvius, as long as you're eating it b'kvius. You're having a supper of steak and fries, do not eat that outside of the sukkah. That's mamish eating supper, that's what you're doing. Don't eat that outside of the sukkah. Aval shaloi b'kvius, but if you're snacking on some salami sticks, that's not a kvius. That's basar, but that's not a kvius. Aval shaloi b'kvius ein lahachmer klal. If you're doing it without a kvius, there's no room for a chumrah at all. And if you take a look at the Sharet Sion, Ois Katan Lamed Ches, he brings down this chumrah from the Chai Adam, and he says that the Chai Adam wants to extend this even to cheese. And the Chavetz Chaim says, V'anoichi loiha etakti. He says, I'm sorry, not cheese. He wants to extend this even to peiros. Cheese is included. But he says the Chai Adam wants to extend this chumrah even to peiros. And the Chavetz Chaim says, V'anoichi loiha etakti. I didn't bring down the chumrah of the Chai Adam. I didn't bring down peiros. I said basar, dagim, gvina. I didn't say peiros. Everybody seems to be makel by peiros. Now, the distinction between peiros and between basar, dagim, and gvina seems to be a very clear distinction. And that is that basar, you do eat in an oifen of kvius. You will sit down and eat a steak and fries for supper. So you are keveya on basar. You're not really keveya on peiros. Even when I told you at the outset of this year that you could have a kvius on peiros because you invite over a bunch of people, you sit down with a beautiful fruit platter and china plates and silver spoons, silver forks, and everything else. That's not the reason that that's a kvius is because it's achila b'chabura. It's the people that are creating the kvius, but you're not really keveya suda on a fruit platter. Nobody sits down to eat a fruit platter for supper. And even people who sit down to eat a salad for supper, they sit down to eat a salad with chicken in it, with London broil in it. They don't sit down to eat a leafy green salad for supper. And you don't sit down to eat a fruit platter for supper. So that's not a kvius. But steak and fries? That's a chosh of a supper. It's not only a supper, it's a chosh of a supper. So over there we have this chumrah, that if you're going to be keveya on basar, then there's nachayin lahachmer. It's proper to be machmer, not to eat it outside of the sukkah. But then I'll bring your attention to Sharet Sion Ois Katan Lamed Tes, which is also a critical Sharet Sion, where the Chavetz Chaim says, Va'afilu ba'ofen zeh. But even in this case, where you're being keveya on basar, and therefore you're being machmer and you're eating it in the sukkah, lo yivarich. But you should not make a bracha. Okay, So now that we've come to the end of Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tezvav, let's just recap what we saw over here. So we see that according to the Mechaber, there's a very clear distinction between pas and a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon. And the examples that I gave you so far of a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon are a classic example would be hot cereals. Those are a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon. And the Mechaber said you only have a chiyuv of sukkah if you're kaveya on them. And to be kaveya on them, the Mishnah Berurah said, it means either you eat it b'chabura or you eat the amount that for you constitutes a meal. Then you're chayav b'sukkah. We have a chumrah of the Magen Avram, not a chumrah. The sheet of the Magen Avram is that tavshil chameshes minei dagon is treated mamish like pas. And therefore, if you eat more than the volume of a beitza, more than the volume of an egg, it's chayiv in sukkah. But a leishev, you only make if you have a kviyos. And then we saw this chumrah, that if you're kaveya suda on basar, dagim, gvina, if you're kaveya suda, if this is really your meal, then also you should eat it in the sukkah, but you don't make a leishev. Okay, beautiful sif tezvav. Now we go not sif, Ois Katan. Now we go to Ois Katan Tezayin. So the Mechaber said, if you're kaveya on tavshil chameshes minei dagon, it's considered a kva v'tzarich sukkah, and you have to eat in a sukkah. First thing the Chavetz Chaim says is pirush midina. We should realize that when the Mechaber says that if you're kaveya suda on tavshil chameshes minei dagon, tzarich sukkah, you need a sukkah, that means me'ikar hadin. The halacha is you must eat it in a sukkah. V'al kain tzarich levarech leishev basukkah. And therefore, if you're kaveya suda on a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon, you have to eat it in the sukkah and you have to make a leishev. And if we follow the Magen Avram brought down in the previous Ois Katan of the Mishnah Berurah, if you eat yoser mikabetza, if you eat more than the volume of an egg of a tavshil chameshes minei dagon, and you're kaveya suda in the manner described by the Chavetz Chaim, so that means, let's say you eat it b'chabura, right? Even if it's not really what for you would constitute a breakfast, but it's a little bit more than a kibetza. So the Magen Avram says that constitutes a kviyas, but not enough to make a leishev. But if you are kaveya, you eat it b'chabura, then me'ikar adin it's chayiv in sukkah, and you have to make a leishev b'sukkah. Okay. The cause of a Maimar Mordechai. Chavetz Chaim brings down a Maimar Mordechai who says, Shemi sha'achal pas haba b'kisnin. If somebody eats pas haba b'kisnin, what is pas haba b'kisnin? Pas haba b'kisnin is food that's made out of chameshes minei dagon. It's grain based, it's baked goods, but it's the type of baked goods that often were eaten for a snack. So, cookies, crispy cookies. Cookies are pas haba b'kisnin. Sweet-filled pastries, a Danish, is pas haba b'kisnin. Pizza is a classic pas haba b'kisnin. What is pizza? It's a pas. It's a dough. It's a belila ava. It's a real dough, but it's a dough that's topped and filled with cheese and sauce and spices. So these are classic cases of pas haba b'kisnin. Cakes, chocolate cake, nut cake. There you get a little bit fishy. Is it really considered pas haba b'kisnin, or is it maybe tavshil mechameshes minei dagon? Many want to say it's pas haba b'kisnin. It's possible that it really falls into the geder of tavshil shel chameshes minei dagon. But in any case, he brings down the Maimar Mordechai here. Shemi sha'achal pas haba b'kisnin b'shachris. Somebody who eats pas haba b'kisnin for breakfast. Now, what I have to stress to you is that the halacha of pas haba b'kisnin right away is going to be more chamor than the halacha of a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon. You never wash on a tavshil shel chameshes minei dagon. You never bench on a tavshil of chameshes minei dagon. If you're kaveya sud on a bowl of oatmeal, you don't make hamotzi and you don't say birkas hamazon. But if you're kaveh suda on Pascha b'kisnin, you wash, you make hamoitzi, and you bench. So Pascha b'kisnin is more chomer than a tafshel of chameshes minei dagan, because sometimes Pascha b'kisnin is halachically treated mamish like pas. And that's what we're discussing here by this Maimer Mordechai. The Maimer Mordechai is discussing how to look at Pascha b'kisnin when it comes to a chiyuv of sukkah. We discussed so far pas. We discussed tafshel chameshes minei dagan. Now, how about Pascha b'kisnin? So the Maimer Mordechai gives a case of Misha achal Pascha b'kisnin b'shachris, somebody who eats Pascha b'kisnin for breakfast, b'soich ha-coffee. He eats it, doesn't mean that he dips it in his coffee. B'soich doesn't mean in his coffee. B'soich means together with his coffee. He sits down and he has a coffee and a Danish, a coffee and a croissant. A croissant is very often considered Pascha b'kisnin, depending on how it's made and what it might have in it, etc., etc. So somebody sits down to have a coffee and a Danish for breakfast, v'kayotza, or something similar to that. The Maimer Mordechai says this was very, very common, like many people do every day of the year. Their breakfast is coffee and a Danish. The Maimer Mordechai says, even though in that case you do not make hamoitzi on the Pascha b'kisnin. Why not? I told you sometimes when you're kaveh suda on Pascha b'kisnin, you make hamoitzi and you bench. But the Maimer Mordechai says, in the case that I'm describing, the person who has the Pascha b'kisnin and a coffee for breakfast, he's not going to make hamoitzi. Why not? Because the bar for hamoitzi and Birkas Hamazon by Pascha b'kisnin is a higher bar than the bar to generate a chiyuv of sukkah. Even though both of them require kviyas suda. To generate a chiyuv of sukkah, what do you need? Kviyas suda. To generate Birkas Hamazon and Hamoitzi, what do you need on Pascha b'kisnin? Kviyas suda. But it's two different bars of kviyas suda. So the Maimer Mordechai says, the person who's eating this Pascha b'kisnin and a coffee for breakfast, he's not going to make hamoitzi. Maimer Mordechai says, I agree to that. He's not going to make hamoitzi. Afal pi she'einu mavarich hamoitzi. Even though he's not going to make hamoitzi, why? Kevan she'einu oichel shir shederech b'nei adam likbaya olav. Because he's not going to eat enough that derech b'nei adam likbaya olav. He's not going to eat enough of the Pascha b'kisnin where it meets the level of, that's a measurement of Pascha b'kisnin, that's a measurement of food that people are kaveh suda on. When somebody sits down for this coffee and Pascha b'kisnin, they generally don't eat that much. So, and we're not going to get into that halacha because we're not learning hilchos brachas now. We're not learning hilchos hasuda now. That's not what we're learning now. We're learning hilchos sukkah now. But the Maimer Mordechai puts it out there as a given. You're not going to make a moitzi. You're not going to say Birkas Hamazon because you're not going to hit the level of eating enough shederech b'nei adam, where most people are kaveh suda, not you. Derech b'nei adam likbaya olav. Mikam makom boi sukkah. The Maimer Mordechai says, nevertheless, this achila is going to generate a chiyuv of sukkah. Why? Sharehu kaveh seudasai olav. Because this person is being kaveh suda. And like I told you before, I brought down the Bir Halacha. This is the same Maimer Mordechai. I read the Bir Halacha to you that says that in the context of generating a chiyuv of sukkah, what makes kviyas? Your personal kviyas. B'didei talya milsa. It's like I told you about the oatmeal. If you eat a half a bowl of oatmeal, then that's a kviyas in the context of hilchos sukkah. So too over here. If your breakfast is the Danish and the coffee, then even if you're not eating an amount, shederech b'nei adam likbaya alav, you're not eating so much Pascha b'kisnin that for most people that constitutes a meal. But if it's your meal, then you're kaveh suda. If you're kaveh suda on Pascha b'kisnin, then it generates a chiyuv of sukkah. And the Chavetz Chaim says, "V'kach nahagnu," and this is our minig levarich alei leisha b'sukkah. This is not the Chavetz Chaim talking. This is the Maimer Mordechai talking. The Maimer Mordechai is saying this Pascha b'kisnin is going to generate a chiyuv of sukkah, And the Maimon Mordechai says, V'kach nahagnu, and this is the way we have comported ourselves, that we eat it in a sukkah, and levarech aleh leisha basukah, and to make a leisha basukah, ayin sham. Take a look over there in the Maimon Mordechai. V'nokat milsa d'shchicha. And the Chavetz Chaim just points out that the way the Maimon Mordechai portrays the case of your having the pasa babikistin b'soicha coffee together with the coffee, he's just giving the milsa d'shchicha. He's describing to you the common practice. The coffee. The drinking of the coffee has nothing to do with it. The drinking of the coffee is irrelevant. Kevan the kava suda la pas kistin. Since you are kaveh suda on the pasa babikistin, it generates a chiyuv of sukkah, and you make a leishev. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. But how about if you are not kaveh suda on the pasa babikistin? Rak, however, sha'achal yoser mikabetza, but you ate more than the volume of an egg of pasa babikistin. Why is that significant? Well, remember the Mechaber said when you eat yoser mikabeya of pas, when it comes to bread itself, if you eat yoser mikabeya, that's an instant kvius. Instant chiyuv sukkah, instant leishev basukah. On the other end of the spectrum, we had a tavshel chameshes minei dagan. When it came to a tavshel of chameshes minei dagan, over there we said yoser mikabeya is not an instant kviyas. You have to be kaiveya. You have to eat it b'chabura. You have to eat an amount that for you constitutes a kviyas suda. Okay, the Maimon Mordechai said pasa babikistin. If you eat an amount that for you is a kviyas suda, you have a chiyuv sukkah, and you have to make a leishev. Now the Mishnah Berurah wants to know, how about if you did not make a kviyas, and you were not kaveh suda, so you didn't eat it b'chabura, and you did not eat enough that for you it constitutes a meal, but you ate yoser mikabeya. Do we treat it like pas, and now it generates a chiyuv sukkah and a leishev, or do we treat it more like tafshel shachameshes minei dagan? So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. If you are not kaveh suda on the kistin, rak sha'achal yosei mikabetza, but you ate more than the volume of an egg, then there's a difference of opinion amongst the achrayim im tzarich levarech leishev basukah, whether or not you have to make a leishev. Chiyuv of sukkah you definitely have. Because let's remember, let's go again to the more kulitic side of the spectrum. Tavshel shachameshes minei dagan. Tavshel shachameshes minei dagan. We had the Magen Avraham and Ois Katan Tezvav, who said if you eat yoser mikabetza of tavshel shachameshes minei dagan, you got to eat it in the sukkah. You're not going to make a leishev unless you make a kviyas, but you got to eat it in the sukkah. So if you eat yoser mikabetza of pasa babikistin, which is more chomer than tavshel shachameshes minei dagan, certainly you have a chiyuv of sukkah. That we're not questioning. The question is, do you make a leishev? Is it like pas and you make a leishev? Or is it more like tavshel shachameshes minei dagan, where you don't make a leishev unless you are kaiveya? So that's why the Mishnah Berurah says here, yesh te'os beino achrayim im tzarich levarech leishev basukah. V'ayin b'shari tshuva, the Mishnah Berurah tells us to look at the shari tshuva, Shakasav, who writes, the le'inyan Shabbos v'yomtiv, very interesting distinction. Now the Chavetz Chaim is going to make now. He's going to make a distinction between whether this is happening on Shabbos or whether it's happening during the week. Shabbos or Yom Tov or during the week. V'ayin b'shari tshuva shekasav, take a look at the shari tshuva who writes, the le'inyan Shabbos v'Yom Tov, if this shaila comes up on Shabbos chalamoid, or it comes up on Yom Tov proper of Sukkot, ba'boiker in the morning kishamikadesh, you came home from shul on Yom Tov and you're making kiddush. So you're making kiddush, and now you're going to eat some pasa babikistin. You're going to have a nice piece of babka. Babka is definitely pasa babikistin. So you're going to eat a nice piece of pasa babikistin over here by kiddush. V'oichel pas kistin b'makom suda. You're eating the pasa babikistin b'makom suda. What does that mean, b'makom suda? Remember that kiddush requires suda. You need to have kiddush b'makom suda. Kiddush requires a suda. You're not eating your suda now. You just came home from shul and you made kiddush. And you're going to have a piece of babka, that's going to be your pasa babikistin. And then you're going out for a walk. You're going out there a drasha. You're going out to a shir. You're going out to visit somebody. You're going out for a walk. And then you're going to come back and you're going to have your Suda. But the Pasa Babakistan that you're eating now is the Suda for Kiddush. It's the Kiddush b'Mokum Suda. That's the Suda of the Kiddush. In that case, L'kulei alma yachal levarach leishav sukkah. In that case, the Shari Tshuva says, you certainly would make a leishav. So again, our question over here is, this person is eating more than the volume of an egg of Pasa Babakistan. He's having babka more than the volume of an egg. But he's not being kiveh suda. In the traditional sense of kiveh suda, this is not breakfast. It is really more of a snack. You make kiddush, you have a quick snack. You can eat the suda later. And we're wondering, do you make a leishav basukah? Because you did eat yoser mikabetza, and by pas, if you eat yoser mikabetza, that creates an instant kviyus, even if it's only a snack, and you have a chiv sukkah and you make a leishav. So how about over here by the babka, by the pasa babakistan? You're eating more than a beya. Is that a kviyus? And now do we know there's a chiv sukkah, but do you make a leishav? So the Shari Tshuva says, if it's Shabbos or Yom Tov, yes, you make a leishav. Why? Because you're using that babka as your Suda of Kiddush. Kiddush b'Mokum Suda. You're being Yoitze Kiddush b'Mokum Suda with that babka. That gives it kviyus, and you make a leishav. The kevin she'oichel oisa b'Torah Suda atzvicha lekiddush, because since you're eating it as the Suda that has to come together with Kiddush, shaper dami she'yivarach birkas sukkah, it makes sense to make a bracha on sukkah of leishav sukkah, the machshavtoi mashve lekva, because your intent to use this as the Suda of Kiddush gives it a kviyus, and that makes it a Suda, and you make a leishav sukkah. Ubechoil, but during the week, ein kedai levarich. But during the week, you go and you eat a piece of babka in the sukkah. You zicher have a chiv sukkah. Again, you zicher have a chiv of sukkah. If you're eating, even if it was a tavshel shel chameshes minei dagon, even if it's a lower level, even if it's more kuladik than pasa babakistan, if you eat yoser mikabetza, you eat more than the volume of an egg, you zicher have a chiv of sukkah. So you're eating that piece of babka, it's more than the volume of an egg, you zicher have a chiv sukkah. But the question is, do you make a leishav? So on that, during the week, says the Chavetz Chaim, u'b'choil ein kedai levarich. It wouldn't be kedai to make a bracha to safek brachas lahakal, because normally we say safek brachas lahakal, which means don't make the bracha. Achein, however, the halacha lamaisa, achein, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, minig ha'olam, the minig of the Welt is levarech af b'choil, to make a leishav basukah. Again, what are we talking about? Pas haba b'kistin, more than the volume of an egg. The Chavetz Chaim says the minig, the Welt vierzach, that you make a leishav basukah. But he says, ukidei lihinotzel mechshash bracha levatala, in order to take away from the worry that maybe you really shouldn't make a leishav, and therefore maybe your leishav basukah chas v'shalom constitutes a bracha levatala, what should you do? Yireh, very interesting. Yireh, you should see to it. Shaloi lotzeis miyad achar achilasai. Don't eat the piece of cake and then instantly leave the sukkah. Rak l'shevesh sham zman ma. You should sit in the sukkah for a while. V'yechavein b'shas berchasai. And when you make the bracha, you should have intent. V'yechavein b'shas berchasai leisher basukah. You should have intent when you make the bracha of leisher basukah. Al ha'achila, that the bracha goes on the eating of the piece of babka, ve'al ha'yeshiva sha'achar zeh, and also on the sitting in the sukkah that you're going to do after you eat the piece of cake. Very fascinating what the Chavetz Chaim is doing. The Chavetz Chaim is saying that really yeshiva b'sukkah, sitting in the sukkah and spending time in the sukkah, is also a mitzvah. After all, it makes sense. The mitzvah is called yeshiva sukkah. The bracha that you make is leishav basukah. So sitting in the sukkah and spending time in the sukkah is also a mitzvah. And really, it's also roi to make a leishav basukah. So what we're going to do over here is we're going to be mitzaref, make the bracha of a leishav, and have in mind it goes on the yoitzer mikabetz of pasa babakistan that you're going to eat, but it also goes on the fact that you're going to sit in the sukkah for a while after you eat. It's very interesting because the Chavetz Chaim says, sit in the sukkah after you eat. He doesn't say before you eat. And how about while you eat? While you eat, you're also sitting in the sukkah. So why can't the bracha go on the yeshiva b'sukkah of while you're eating? Because that yeshiva b'sukkah is not for the intent of sitting in the sukkah. That yeshiva b'sukkah is only peripheral to eating the piece of cake. You're in the sukkah because you want to eat the piece of cake. So that's why you're in the sukkah. What the Chavetz Chaim wants is that the leisha should go on a distinct act of spending time in the sukkah. So make the leishev, make the mezainis, make the leishev, eat the cake, and then spend some extra time in the sukkah and have kavanah that the leishev should go on that, eating in the sukkah as well. Okay, even though it's already 45 minutes, I'm going to push on a little bit more. Let's go to the words of the Ramah, where the Ramah addresses the question of sleeping in the sukkah in a little bit of greater depth. Hagah, second line down, says the Ramah, the Mechaber told us on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis that you're not even allowed to sleep a shinas haroi outside of the sukkah. So why is it, says the Ramah, that nowadays so many people are mekel when it comes to sleeping in the sukkah? She'ein yishenim basukkah raka medaktikin mitzvahs. You find nowadays who sleeps in the sukkah. Only the real medaktikin mitzvahs is looked upon as a chumrah. Oh, he sleeps in the sukkah. By and large, the Hamoinam, they don't sleep in the sukkah. What's the reason for that? So the Ramah gives a few reasons here. First, he says, Yeshay mishum tzina. Some say that it's because of the cold. Yesh tsar lishayin b'makayim sakarim. Here, where we are, even in the United States, very often during Sukkot could already be late in the year. It could be end of October, certainly middle of October. Sometimes it's cold at night. It could get quite cold, quite chilly to sleep in the sukkah. Also, let's remember, by us, it's not like Eretz Yisrael where Kamat doesn't rain on Sukkot. It rains. You know, and sometimes it's drizzly, you're not sure, it's going to rain, it's not going to rain. The weather forecast says it's going to rain. You're going to get woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning soaked. So the Ramah mentions exclusively tzina because of the cold. This tsar to sleep in the sukkah in the cold areas. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yudzai Mishum Tzina. Vim Kain, if so, says the Mishnah Berurah, Misha ain't like Karu Muksasais Karai. Certainly, if somebody doesn't have proper blankets and quilts, Viesh Tzina, and it's cold, Ain Loy Lahachmer Lishain Sham. There's no reason to be machmir. We have a Ramah. The Ramah says, Yesh tsar lishaim mimkayim sakarim. The Ramah recognizes it's a tsar to sleep in the sukkah when it's cold. So you don't have good blankets, don't sleep in the sukkah. Not just that, says the Chavetz Chaim, the nikra hedyet, you're called a fool. Like we're going to see later in Siv Zayin, somebody who eats in the sukkah in the rain, when he's not chayv in sukkah, is called a hedyet. Now let's go a little bit weiter, where the Ramah brings down another possible reason why people don't sleep in the sukkah, and why you find that only the machmirim, only the medaktikim b'mitzvahs sleep in the sukkah. Very interesting reason. Let's remember, the mitzvah of sukkah is teishvu kein teduru. You're supposed to live in the sukkah the way you live in your home. So you're supposed to sleep in the sukkah the way you sleep in your bedroom. Says the Ramah over here, V'li nera. It appears to me there's another reason why people don't sleep in the sukkah. Mishum the mitzvah sukkah ish ubeisai. Because the mitzvah of sukkah is ish ubeisai. Ish ve'ishtai. A husband and his wife. Kederek shehu dar kol hashana. The way he lives all year. All year, a person sleeps in the bedroom together with his wife. That's the mitzvah of sukkah. The mitzvah of sukkah is to live the way you live in your home. So you're supposed to be together with your wife. And therefore, in a place where you cannot sleep together with your wife in the sukkah, you don't have a private sukkah where it would be appropriate to sleep together with your wife, potter. Then the Ramah says, you're mamish potter. You're potter from sleeping in the sukkah. Because the whole mitzvah is teishu kein teduru. The way you live in your house is you're together with your wife. If you can't sleep together with your wife in the sukkah because you don't have privacy, then you're potter. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Ois Katan Yudches, potter. The Gra and the Bir Agra argues on this, and he says, Dolay miftar mishum zeh. This would not be uptur. The Gam the Magen Avram masik the mishum zeh loy miftar. The Magen Avram also concludes that this would not be a valid ptur. Now he says a very interesting thing. You see, the Ramah said that this is a p'tur. Now, it seems that what the Ramah is saying is the p'tur, it's an exemption. What's the p'tur? The p'tur is that it's not teishvu ke'ein teduru. You have no chiyuv. It's not that you have a chiyuv, but you have a p'tur. You have no chiyuv, because the whole chiyuv of yeshiva sukkah is when you could do it ba'oifen teishvu ke'ein teduru. You cannot sleep in the sukkah in the oifen of teishvu ke'ein teduru, because the oifen of teishvu ke'ein teduru is together with your wife. You don't have a private sukkah; it's inappropriate. You cannot do teishvu ke'ein teduru. So for you to sleep in the sukkah without your wife, you're not doing the mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah. It's not teishvu ke'ein teduru. So you're potter from sukkah. The Gra and the Magen Avram say no such p'tur. However, the limud schus acher ala olam, but the Magen Avram is melamed schus in a different way. He says mishum dehevile mitztar kishein yochel lishen shamim ishtay. The Magen Avram takes a little bit of a different tact. He says it's not like the Ramah suggests that it's not teishvu ke'ein teduru to sleep in the sukkah without your wife. The Magen Avram and the Gra, they don't seem to like that p'tur. They seem to say it could be teishvu ke'ein teduru even if you sleep in the sukkah without your wife. But there's a different problem. The problem is mitztair. The same way you're not potter, the same way you're not chayv in sukkah if it's raining, because you have a p'tur to go out because you're mitztair. If it's freezing cold, you're mitztair. If it's unbearably hot, you're mitztair, so you could leave the sukkah. If you have to sleep in the sukkah without your wife, you're mitztair. You're not comfortable. You're not happy. You're sleeping without your wife. So you're mitztair, so you could go out. So suggests the Magen Avram. Says the Chafetz Chaim, v'hinei lefi tam zeh, according to that rationale, im ein mitztair, if you're not mitztair, if the fact that you're going to sleep in the sukkah without your wife, you're not mitztair. Kegoin, for example, says the Chafetz Chaim, she'ein etzloi zman oina achshav. The Mishnah Berurah is suggesting over here, why would you be mitztair if you're going to sleep in the sukkah without your wife? So the simplest way to understand it is you're mitztair because you're going to lose out on marital relations. You cannot have marital relations if you're going to be sleeping in the sukkah without your wife. So you're going to lose out on that. You're going to lose out on the marital relations. But if you're not mitztair, why? She'ein etzloi zman oina achshav. It's not a proper time for marital relations. Let's say somebody's wife is in nida, so he's not going to have marital relations anyway. So, okay, then ein loy lifter atzmai min hashena. Then there's no excuse. Then why aren't you in the sukkah? Why are you mitztair? You're not mitztair. And the Chafetz Chaim says, umashma mikama achroinim, and you should know that the implication of many achroinim is demand ef shaloi lishoinim ishtay b'sukkah, somebody who cannot sleep together with his wife in the sukkah. Dein loy sukkah miyuchedes, he doesn't have a private sukkah. Lo yevatel zman oilo v'leil tefillah. He shouldn't be mevatel zman oina. If it's the proper time for him to have marital relations with his wife, he shouldn't say, well, it's Yom Tov, I got to sleep in the sukkah, I'm going out to the sukkah, that's it, I'm being mevatel oina. I'm not gonna be mekayim my chiyuv of oina to have marital relations with my wife. Let's remember that that's a chiyuv min HaTorah. She'era ksusa v'oinasa lo yigra. A man is a chiyuv min HaTorah to have marital relations with his wife. It's not only a luxury. So you should not be mevatel the oina. Certainly if it's leil tefillah, if it's the night that his wife went to the mikveh, where there's an express chiyuv to be together with his wife, he should not be mevatel that on account of the fact that it's sukkah and he wants to sleep in the sukkah. And so he should go into the house. He should go into the house, go to the bedroom, and be together with his wife. And further, turn to Kuf Daled Amud Beis, says the Chafetz Chaim, Ve'ein l'chayvai la'acher shenizdavi gemishtoi sheyachzer l'sukkasai. And you also should not be mechayev him, that tell him, okay, so listen, be together with your wife, have relations with your wife, and when you're finished, get up and go out to the sukkah. No. Don't obligate him and say that after marital relations he should get up, leave the bedroom, and go out to the sukkah. He should stay in the home and sleep together with his wife until Amud HaShachar, until it's morning. He shouldn't run out right afterwards on account of a chiyuv of sleeping in the sukkah. Okay, so we had over here in the Ramah, to sum up, when it comes to the question of sleeping in the sukkah, the Ramah wondered out loud, why is it that nowadays people seem to be makel when it comes to sleeping in the sukkah? The Ramah himself gave two suggestions. One is people don't sleep in the sukkah because of the cold, and the Chavetz Chaim said, you see that that's valid. If it's cold and you don't have good blankets, good quilts, don't sleep in the sukkah. Then the Ramah said another possibility is that there's a HaTorah from sleeping in the sukkah for a married individual, because if he doesn't have a private sukkah, which is most often the case, it's not Teshvu Kain Taduru. If it's not Teshvu Kain Taduru, if you're not going to sleep with your wife in the sukkah, it's not Teshvu Kain Taduru. And if it's not Teshvu Kain Taduru, there's no chiyuv. The Magen Avram, the Bir Agra, the Chavetz Chaim brought down that they don't like this, but the Magen Avram said, you're mitzvah. If you can't be together with your wife, so then it's mitzvah. You have a tur from the sukkah, als mitzvah. And the Chavetz Chaim pointed out, somebody shouldn't say, I have to sleep in the sukkah, and therefore he's going to be mevatel his chiyuv of oina to his wife, certainly not on Leil Tefillah. He should be with his wife in the bedroom, in the house, and he shouldn't get up in the middle of the night, leave either. He should stay in the bedroom the entire night. Now, there's a very interesting bir halacha on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, Dibur al Maschil, V'al Yaseh Shum Tashmish Bozui. Now, as far as the halacha l'maisa, I don't think this bir halacha is negeya very often. Nowadays, I've seen people who have private porches right off their master bedroom, and they have a private, so to speak, sleeping sukkah. I still don't know how negeya this shaila would be, because it's still outside, it's still outdoors. How close are you to other people? What are other people going to be able to hear? Does this fall into the gedarim of tznius? Probably in most cases not, but there's a different point that I think we could take out of this bir halacha. The Ramah had said at the end of Sif Aleph, on the top of Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, Va'al Yaseh Shum Tashmish Bozui B'Sukkah. A person should not undertake any degrading activities, any activities that are bozui, that are shameful, that are derogatory, degrading in a sukkah. A sukkah is not a place to do a tashmish bozui. I gave an example. You don't bring raw meat into the sukkah and put on an apron and start butchering meat inside the sukkah. That's not something to do in the sukkah. Says the bir halacha, v'tashmish hamita loy mikri tashmish bozui. Would it be appropriate if you had the proper setting? You have a house, and you have a very, very private backyard that's away from everybody, and maybe you already have empty nest syndrome. You don't have any children in the home. You have no other families in the home. You're alone with your wife, and you have a nice big backyard, very far separated from everybody else, and you have a private sukkah out in the backyard. No one's going to overhear anything. There's no, you don't have a canvas sukkah. You have a nice solid walled wood sukkah. Nobody could see even any shadows, and nobody could see between the cracks. And you mamish have a situation of tznius. You're up in the mountains in your summer home, and there's nobody within a mile of your house. Would it be appropriate to taka sleep with your wife in the sukkah and even have marital relations in the sukkah? Is that something which is inappropriate? Bitsila de memenusa? Should somebody have in the sukkah? Should somebody engage in marital relations? Tashmish Amita? Says the bir halacha, v'tashmish Amita loy mikri tashmish bozui. Marital relations is not a tashmish bozui. Quite the opposite. That is part of the chiyuv, really, of Teshvu Kain Taduru. The gam, so by the way, it is interesting. People have brought up the shaila. If sleeping with your wife and having marital relations is part and parcel of Teshvu Kain Taduru, so if you have a sukkah where you cannot do that, is that a flaw in the sukkah? Does that, according to some, passel the sukkah? Because you can't be Mekayim Teshvu Kain Taduru with that sukkah, it's actually spoken about. But in any case, the Bir halacha says it's definitely appropriate because it's Teshvu Kain Taduru. And then even more importantly, says the Bir halacha, V'gam be'etzem loy mikri tashmish bazui. The tashmish amita, marital relations between a husband and wife, is not considered a tashmish bazui. Bameshu Mekayim mitzvah shel period v'rivya v'oina. What do you mean? It's a mitzvah say. It's the first mitzvah say in the Torah. Mitzvah number 1 in the chinuch is puravu. So you're being Mekayim a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah say. And it's also a chiyuv that a husband has to his wife. The world, out in the shmutzadik world that we live in, they have turned marital relations into something which is derogatory, into something which is buzzy because of the way they treat it, because of the hefkerus that they treat tashmish amita with, the terrible hefkerus that they treat it with, and the disgusting manner that they treat the whole subject. They've turned it into something that people tend to start to look at as a tashmish buzzy. But in the olam HaTorah, in the world of the Torah Kedosha, in the world al pi Torah with the hashkafas HaTorah and everything else, tashmish amita is not a tashmish buzzy. It's a mitzvah say, and it's a chiyuv, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's an integral part of what makes successful shalom bayis. And that's a very important Torah-dik outlook that we have to have. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This course of limud HaTorah should stand Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should said, Yeshua's for Vus and Parnasa to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek, the Meher of Yameinu. Be well.